Okay, so today I really want to speak about advice from grandparents, and particularly the best advice I ever got from my grandfather. Now, to preface this a little bit, I'd tried to go to university like twice before I really made it stick on the third time. And the first couple of times, firstly, I was never really passionate about what I was studying. And second of all, I had really crippling anxiety. And I had this sounds really stupid, but I had this sense when I would go to lectures that everybody was watching me. And if I moved wrong or, if there was anything out of place, I would be judged by the masses. And it's ironic because now I actually seek out situations where I'm in front of big audiences, whether it's teaching or whether it's Toastmasters and speech competitions and that kind of stuff. And I love it. It doesn't give me that sense of anxiety anymore. But back then it did. The idea kind of terrified me. And so I failed out of university my first two times. Firstly, trying to do a commerce degree. Second of all, I had it in my head that rocks would be really, really lucrative. And I could convince myself with the appropriate sized paycheck that rocks were in fact interesting. And so I studied geology. And suffice it to say that if you don't have a passion and some kind of internal enthusiasm for the subject, then you're not going to do very well at it. And so there was probably a combination of factors, but I sucked and I dropped out twice. And before I started on the third try, I'd reconciled with my grandfather, or, he'd reconciled with me. We had gone up to visit him. And my grandfather at that stage wasn't that well. Like, it was kind of clear that he didn't have more than a few years left in him. And so I wanted to soak up that opportunity because my grandfather was a very successful person. He was a professor of management and he worked with a number of big corporations throughout the decades outside of his academic kind of sphere. And so I had a lot of admiration for that, and I wanted to know from him what would be his advice for somebody going back to university. And what he told me was that you shouldn't pass up any opportunity to make a new connection because you never know what that chance encounter might lead to. It might be the best thing that ever happens to you. And unless you take that plunge, you're not going to know. And he said that applies to everything. It applies to asking questions of your professors. It applies to going up and talking with them after class. It applies to asking questions of your classmates too. And I think at the time I appreciated the wisdom of it, but I had this hesitancy. It's that old saying, better to be thought a fool than to open one's mouth and prove it. And so in the end, I took the plunge with it, and I'm very glad I did because, not everybody liked what I had to say. But over time and over the years, I gained some core kind of social skills and navigation of these things. And I learned how to make friends. And again, because it had been a while since I was competent at making friends. In the end, what I ended up with was some very close friends that I have to this day. And not only that, but I formed dynamics with my professors where when it came time to do postgrad, I had options and I had good working relationships with a number of different academics. And I'm happy the way things panned out there too. And you still run into these people and, you can share an anecdote and have a yarn and they can sometimes bring a smile to your day. But I think the important takeaway from all of that was that I quite possibly could have stayed in my shell, believing that I wasn't competent enough to put myself out there. But if I had, that comfort zone would have stayed very small, and I would have missed out on all of those opportunities and all of those good times and all of those bonds that you have with other people that give your life so much meaning. That would have been absent, and it would have been a very hollow start to my 30s. And so I'm pretty grateful for that advice. It took me a long way, and I'm fortunate as well that I was able to push through that anxiety and that awkwardness that I felt and come out the other side with, I guess through the process you do build a bit of resiliency. It's a wholesome thing. And I think perhaps for younger generations like Gen Z and below, it's an important thing to know is that, not everybody is going to like you, but until you put yourself out there, you'll never find the people that will. It's very rare that just happens without you putting in some kind of effort. You have to come out to the river of opportunity. You can't stay in the brush. You can't stay in the forest. You got to come out to that river in order to see the other people that are also fishing. I don't know if that analogy works. It works in my head, so we'll roll with that one. So yeah, that was the advice my grandfather gave me, and I'd be very interested to hear what advice other people's grandparents gave them. And I came across this thing on the internet. Somebody had been talking with their grandparents, and their grandfather fought in World War II, and they'd asked him about the moral fibre of humanity in general, and he'd said, well, look, 10% of people are always good, and 10% of people are always bad, and the other 80%, it just depends on the circumstances. And I love that as a piece of wisdom, because I think I'm certainly within that 80%, although I try my very best to be closer to that 10% good. And I think there's a lot of people within that 80% that could be, depending on the circumstances, not very good people, but they're still fascinating and they're still good within the situation that they're born into. And I think my life is richer for knowing these people. And then I'm fortunate enough that I also know some of the people that I think probably fit into that 10% always good as well, and they're marvelous too. And I mean, that's not to say that 90% of people are always going to like you. Far from it. There's going to be a lot of people within that 80% and even the 10% that don't like you. But what it does say is that 90% of people on planet Earth are worth getting to know, to at least see whether they might be somebody that you could gain value from, that you could provide value for, that you can have a genuine interaction with, that you can have this sense of like you're both richer for the experience. 90% of people, that's possible. So give it a go. Okay, until next time.